Hi everyone, welcome to Unit 3 of Section 3. I'm Christopher Epling, your instructor for the Graphic Arts course here on the Holler. In this unit, we're focusing on tips and techniques for those mediums that we're selecting. The medium that we've actually selected, we're leaving out a few, but the ones that are included in these little tiny exercise tutorials and helps and tidbits are acrylic, watercolor, colored pencils, pen and ink, graphite, pencil in general, and then also we're going to pull in a little bit of digital, and we're going to make all those accessible here in the last 2 units of Section 3. Now if you notice, the first 2 sections are longer. The reason for that, formulating your narrative, what you're going to do, sometimes it's more difficult than actually doing it. Coming up with an idea, but you've already formulated that idea. If you're in this section and you're working through this unit, then you've come up with an idea, you've even worked on a storyboard, underdrawing, a study of what it is you want to do, and now you're ready to start producing that art. So in today's tutorial, we're going to be looking at different tips and techniques for a few of those mediums I listed. In the last unit of this section, we're going to include the ones that we can't get to today. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started with Unit 3 of Section 3. Okay everyone, the very first thing we're going to focus on is paper. Now paper has what's called a texture or a grade or tooth to it. Basically what that means is that there's a weight to the paper. You notice this is a thin piece of copying paper. Now notice how flimsy it is. It's easy to bend, it's loose. If you're going to use any wet medium, you have to choose your paper and choose the right paper correctly. Now going through all of this first, before we get into the actual medium part, is very important, because when you are choosing to do, say, watercolor, and you're working on paper that doesn't hold that very well, you're not going to have very good results at all. Okay, so let's consider watercolor paper. Now this is Canson. Canson's just a brand. You can get any brand you want. It doesn't matter. The thing about the watercolor paper is that it's 140 pounds. Okay, pounds means weight of the paper, right? So it's heavier paper, right? This is I don't promote any type of brand, but I will tell you this. I got this at the local Walmart, so it's not expensive. You get a lot. This is 8.5 by 11 sheet, so you can't do anything really large on it, but it has a great tooth to it, and it holds watercolor very well. It also holds ink if you want to use ink. Okay, so be sure you have the right paper. Here's another example. This is probably about an 80-pound paper. It's a little thicker than the paper that I started out with, the letter-sized copying paper. This is really good for penciling, sketching, graphite. It has a heavier tooth to it, and you can feel the texture, the grain of the paper. You can feel that there's texture there, so it'll grab the graphite better. Those of you working in pencil alone, be sure you have a little bit of texture on the surface of whatever it is you're drawing on, because that really helps a lot. Now you can also go as far as to get specific paper for specific things. I know that some of you have probably seen this particular type of paper promoted in art craft stores. If you've been in any art craft store, you've seen these types of packs of paper. So they come in a pack. I've used a lot of these. Basically what this does, this type of paper, it's 100-pound paper, so it's a little less in weight than the watercolor paper, but it's thick enough that it holds ink very well. If you notice, there's lines here. These lines help for you to determine where you're going to put panels and such. Here's some completed pages using this paper. So you can see how I've used those lines to go in and create panels. I've went in and put specific things going on inside of those lines. They help to guide me. I know where I'm going to place certain elements, where I'm going to put boxes, panels, speech balloons, so on and so forth. So this paper is really great for pen and ink. Pen and ink is my favorite medium to use. I'll go ahead and tell you that's why I'm starting out with pen and ink today for our tutorial. So hopefully you don't mind. Now, if you want to work on any type of heavier paper, so this is 100-pound, but it's a vellum surface. So the difference is, remember earlier I was talking about feel the paper and feel the tooth of the paper, feel the texture. This is a vellum surface. It means it's very smooth. So you can use pencil on it. You can also use ink on it. There's various things you can use on this paper. You can even use oil pastels. It's heavy enough that it can hold that. I wouldn't say you can use acrylic paint for this, but you possibly could use other wet mediums, okay? So it's up to you. Now, of course, there's canvas. You can buy these in packs. You can even go and get wood and staple gun and create your own canvas. If you're using canvas, it's wonderful. Remember the texture? Canvas has a real specific texture to it. This texture has to be corrected before you start painting. Otherwise, the paint will just go and smear and pick up on these different lines and choose and grooves, and it won't work. So you have to get something called gesso, and you put the gesso on here, you seal it really good, and it makes it nice smooth surface, almost like the vellum surface. Now those of you interested in doing more watercolor on a heavier paper, you could go as far as to get something like this. Now this is a very heavy grade paper. It's very thick. This holds watercolor in such a good way. The tooth of this paper is amazing. It's a little more expensive. It comes in giant sheets and you have to cut it. But if you really are into watercolor, you really should look into getting heavier grade paper. The last thing I want to share with you is the Canson. And I guess it looks like I'm actually promoting Canson. This is a Canson Pure White Bristol board. This is actually a drawing illustration board. This is a very, very thick type of paper surface. Okay, this is something that if you're going in and wanting to put some very thick medium on there, you can handle it. I'd say this would even handle acrylic. I'd go as far as to say that. It's a wonderful surface for comics. I'll share with you a couple things that I've done. So what I've done is I've taken this Canson paper and I've cut it down the middle here. Okay, and so this is 2 pages, one here and one here. This is 1 page from using this Canson type of paper. So you can see the pen and ink holds very well. Now notice the blue lines. We're going to go back to what that is and what that means a little bit later, but remember these blue lines here in a second when we start focusing on techniques. So if you've understood what type of paper you're going to use, you know that you have to have a certain paper for a type of medium. Thicker paper for wetter mediums. And then also you can use surfaces such as vellum, smooth it out for different other types of mediums. Your paper is important. So choosing the right paper, choosing the right medium, that's where we want to focus on today. Now let's move into ink. Ink is something that I love to use. I love ink. And we'll talk about the different ways to use it and tips and techniques with using it. I can't go into for every single medium today. There's no way for me to go into this long exercise showing you how to use it. But I have tips and techniques that will help you. So let's go ahead and focus on that now. Using ink is absolutely hands down my personal favorite way of creating art. I showed you this earlier. This is a large Bristol board, the thicker board, the Canson board paper that's been trimmed down. And you can see in this I've used ink, and that's it. That was my selected medium choice, and that's what I used. But all these different things that I've done on this paper that you can see, such as the cross-hatching, the hatching, the stippling, all these different techniques are important and things you should learn. Now, going into ink, you can choose different colors of ink. They create all sorts of different colors for you. So those of you out there that don't want to use black, there's all the colors of the rainbow that you can choose from and select from. If you're using ink, you're going to make mistakes. If you make a mistake, you can use whiteout, such as I've done here and a few other places, but you can't really see it that well because it covers it so well. But you can use whiteout, or you can get something called proof white, which is just basically whiteout. You use a brush with this and you go over the lines and mistakes and things that you don't want to use. There's even white ink that you can use to actually draw with. So you could imagine, what if this was a black piece of paper, solid black, and I went in with this white ink, and all the white that you see was the things that I went ahead and applied and drawn on the paper. That would take forever. But you see that whenever it's inverted, so from black to white, the difference is that it could create. So using ink is a delicate thing. There's different brands. There's different types of ink that you can get, such as a matte ink, and there's one with like a really fine finish, a glossy finish. All these things don't matter really right now. I mean, you're just getting started in art, so get a bottle of ink. They're probably available for you in the classrooms. Get a bottle of ink and get started. Now, let's consider different methods of application. There's brushes that you can get. Brushes come in all sorts of variety. There's thin brushes, thick brushes, brushes specifically made for a certain type of medium. There's different things that you can get to apply to your work that'll enhance it. There's also something called an ink wash. Basically what you do with that is you take a little tiny lid. I use pop lids in the past. You use a pop lid, you put a little bit of water in it, you apply some ink down in that, just a dab of it, just a little bit of ink, and what happens is you have a gray wash tone that is applied. It comes out in it, okay? Those of you who are fans of Copic markers, which is more or less a alcohol-based marker of ink, there's ink in this. These are very expensive, okay? You can get the same effect of these markers using different colors of ink and water, okay? I promise you, you can get every color of the rainbow using this wash technique. Now, let's consider a little bit on different methods of application for ink. We have a lot to cover today, so we have to sort of go through this pretty fast. Besides brushes, there's tons of different technical pens that you can get. They come in all variety of sizes, and what I mean by that is there's thick technical pens, and then there's very thin technical pens. There's also brush pens, which are actually synthetic or sable hair brushes. Both of those are options that you have if you choose that. So there's tons of different ways you can go about it. There's even these types of pens which are felt. Okay, they're basically just disposable pens that you can get. So we're just going to take a couple ganders of how this works application-wise. So these are my technical pens and all their variety. And then I have brushes over here. This synthetic brush offers you a variety of lines. You can start off very thin and go very thick, and then go back to being very thin. So all of that happens with what we call pressure. So you push it down a little harder, you're going to get more ink coming out, so on and so forth. Now there's all sorts of different types of pens, and how they compare then to brushes is very interesting. This technical pen is very thin. I doubt you could even see this line that I'm making. It's a terribly thin line. It's very thin, used for cross hatching or for hatching in general. Now, the disposable pens come in different tips. Some are just wide blocks, such as this, that can be turned on the side to do thinner lines. These are really handy. They're great to use. The problem is you can't refill them. You have to throw them away. Eventually, they go bad. Other technical pens offer thicker lines, such as this one. These, you put reservoir ink inside it, so it unscrews. Inside of it is a little container where your ink goes. So you can keep using this pen. You don't have to throw it away. But something I'm going to stress today with all the mediums that you select, you have to clean your brushes. You have to clean your work. If you use a brush, you clean it, right? It's just a mandatory understanding that that's what you're going to do. I want to take a look a little bit comparing these. I think this is a thin one. Yeah, this is really thin, disposable felt pen. Now these lines are very similar. If you had a brush, if you're going to use a brush, then you can get all the different types of looks and all the different types of widths and lines with that brush by using pressure. And the tip of your pen matters as well. Now, to show this, I'm going to use a different color of ink here. So, as you can see, with this brush, you have to get a little wet though. This has a hue of it. It's a very it's a sepia look to it. So see, now I'm pressing down, I'm going thin again. You can get this effect using brushes. You do not need technical pens. You can make all the lines that we made here using just a brush. Okay? Now, when you go into working in your work and you want to show different things in there, such as you have your contrast and your value and things. So what you do is you use methods such as cross-hatching. I think we all understand what that is. Making parallel lines like this is hatching. When you go back over it again and you actually put more lines, maybe thicker, maybe thinner, this is cross-hatching. This helps to show value with ink. Everyone has seen the method where you have the ball and then you take the ball and you put shadow to it. So if the light source is coming from up here, let's say here's a lamp, okay, the lamp is standing up here just like so, and the light is coming down on this ball. If that's the case, all the shadow is going to be behind the ball. Now notice now I'm bending my lines a little bit to show the curvature of the ball. Okay, doing that and then adding your lines for cross hatching helps to show that there's an actual contour lines going on. There's a shape to that. This lines that I'm making. There's a shape to it. It's not just a very 2D type of thing. We've shown this as being two-dimensional. Okay, so now that we've understood ink, we're going to move on and we're going to take a look at watercolor. Before we move to watercolor, here's a couple examples of my pen and ink drawing. This is a graphic novel page. The first was a page from a book about a dog named Bella. Commissioned artwork for a local business, all pen and ink, some wash, and a abandoned tobacco field. Okay, everyone, we're talking about watercolor. Now, this is a very, very, very large area when it comes to choosing how you're going to apply watercolor, because there's so many different ways to apply it. Just a few. Okay, you have pencils, which really act just like colored pencils until you apply water to them. So you would color such as this. You get your brush, apply some water to your brush, apply that to your paper, and you see what happens. It blends. Now these pencils work really well, except for the fact there's not a lot of control of where your color is going to go. So if you're using something with a lot of tight spaces in it, then it's really, really difficult. Another option you have are these little tubes. They look like acrylic paint tubes, but they're not. They're actually watercolor. With that, you'll need a palette. I'll test out a color here. This is going to be Cerulean Blue. Take a little bit off the top here. Put a little dab. You don't need much when I'm just testing it out to show you. A little bit. Then from here, what you need to do is get your brush wet again. Take it and apply it to your canvas, your palette. Get a little bit of watercolor on there, and then you can start to apply that. I like this method. Pretty good. There's a lot of control with this because you know where you're applying the medium, so you can actually get those tight spots if you want them. The other options that you have for watercolor are the actual cakes, the watercolor cakes. They come in these little tiny containers. You can see those at any hobby store. These little containers have all these colors in them, which are dry blocks of cake of watercolor. There's different ways you could do this. You could take your brush, you could put the water on top of the cake of which one you're using, and just apply a little water, get it a little moist, and then from there you can start pulling color out of that block and putting it on your paper. Or there's another method. If you have access to a spray bottle, you take the spray bottle, spray the canvas where you want it, get the canvas wet, then you can also start to apply that watercolor to areas that it's already wet. Now, in those types of situations where you'd want to do that, it's where you really want to go light to dark. You're always going light to dark when it comes to applying watercolor, acrylic, or oil. Light to dark, just remember that. Now let's say you have a brush. You use it all the time. You love your brush. Your brush is there for you in hard times and good times. You don't take care of your brush will destroy. It's just not gonna work for you all the time. How you clean your brush, this is so important. You use water, of course, you get it wet. Now you can either stringe it out by picking it with your fingers, pulling out the pigment. It's not gonna hurt you, it's not toxic. I hope not anyway. The older watercolors might be, so you might want to check the label. But anyway, you take it, you get it wet, and you pull the water out. You get it to a fine tip and let it dry that way. That way next time you use it, it's ready to go and it's in good shape. I have this little brush holder that I use. I let mine dry like that. You don't have to go as far as that to work with these brushes. You could, if you have a couple dollars in your pocket, go to a hobby store and buy one of these aqua brushes. The aqua brushes are great because you don't have to dip them in water. You just squeeze a little bit and get that water flowing into your brush. Then pull whatever choice of watercolor method you want and apply it that way. Now with these, cleaning them, you really have to just get them wet just as you would a normal brush. But if you really don't like having to dip and then go back and re-dip and continue that, this is a great choice for you with watercolor. With watercolor, you want to also think about mixing and contrasting your colors. leave a little white area where there's white, and then you also mix those into one another and see how they blend. You can notice at the bottom here, I've already started to blend these three colors. Now you notice it's very light and it goes to dark. This is to give you contrast, it's to give you value, and you want to always do this. Test your colors out. Have a separate sheet of paper, test those colors out, see how they work for you. There's all different methods of using watercolor. There's also one thing, if you have a couple more dollars besides what you spend on your brush, you can also get what's called Frisket. What Frisket is you take it and you apply it down on the surface of the paper, of your watercolor paper, okay, and it dries like a wax. Here's a little bit right here on this paper, so you can't really see it that well. You apply it with a brush though, typically. Now once that dries, what happens is, and it dries pretty fast, once that dries, you can actually take your watercolor, okay, pull your watercolor out, and you can actually color over top of this, okay. And what will happen is, when that watercolor dries and you go back in a little bit and you're like, okay, I finished the area of my watercolor, and you go back, you can rub this Frisket and it'll come off, and underneath it will be white. Of course this was not dried yet, but that's the application, that's the idea. All sorts of different choices for watercolor. You also have these, which are sort of like almost like oil pastels, but they're not. They're actually water soluble oil pastels, so they are oil pastels. But these are really neat, but notice the really thick end on this. If you're wanting tight spots and control, you're not going to get it with this. So keep that in mind while you're working on your final product. You can also take watercolor and start to create different types of value with it. This is just gray that I've used on some various sketches. I've just used a little gray. It almost reminds you of a Copic marker a little bit. I've applied a little bit of gray to these characters just to give them a little more value and contrast with shadowing. And sometimes it gets a little creepy. But anyway, watercolor is awesome. It's a great medium. Different ways to use it. The choice is yours. Be sure to clean your brush and watch after it. And also, go light to dark. Always, always light to dark. Some examples of watercolor for myself. This is a commission from the University of Pikeville. This is all watercolor. And then something fun for a children's book. The title for this book was Feed Sack Rich. Colored pencils. One of my favorite mediums to use. Most of you, I think all of you, enjoy using it. Great thing about colored pencils, they're in almost every classroom across America. Every art room has colored pencils. Now, not all art classes have the type of brands that we need. So I don't promote certain brand, but I will have to admit this for our little short tutorial. The brand you choose matters, okay? Doesn't have to be Prismacolor, but it matters. If you get really cheap, really cheap colored pencils for a project, let's say you're just messing around, that's fine, no problem. But if you want to blend those colors and have those colors look really nice, you need a certain brand. Now, with colored pencils, the same as watercolor, you want to go light to dark. You want to build up your drawing slowly. Cover the areas that you have light, cover the areas that you have contrast and value. Watch the value, it's very important. You want to also think about the type of paper you're using. The paper is important too, because you're not going to get a very good, what we call the tooth. We talked about that earlier. The texture on the paper, it matters a lot. Now, blending is important with I'll keep wanting to call it watercolor, color pencil. It's important. It's how you build up a drawing. It's how you use colored pencils. Okay, blending can be done in a few different ways. All right, one way is you can do what I'm doing. You can slowly build up on this. Okay, we build up on it so that it gets darker and darker and darker. Okay, and this is how you're wanting to build your with your underpainting, your underdrawing. This is how you want to build on top of that. Okay, you want to go from light to dark in areas that are needed, and make sure you show that. Now, blending. One way to blend is you take the lighter color of the color pencil you started with, and you go over everything, and you really press down a little bit harder with it. And what that does is it causes the pigment that's inside of this wooden stick here that we call a color pencil. It causes that pigment to move around on the paper. That's why you want a paper with a little bit of tooth to it, a little bit of grab, because when you start doing this, you want it to blend. And as you can see now, we went from light to dark here, and it's blended fairly well in the middle. Using colored pencils is really fun. You can really add tons of detail. You can get in those tight spots and really make something pop. Blending, though, again, is very important. Now, I want to talk about mixing a little bit. This is what we've done here. There's other ways to do this, actually. And one method that I learned about here recently, believe it or not, consists of baby oil. Now, baby oil is, if you're not familiar with it, it's pretty greasy, okay? In fact, it's super greasy, so you don't want to use a lot of it. But you'll need a brush. You take your brush, and you get just a little bit on the tip of your brush, and you want to go in there, and you want to move that pigment around. So you can see how that's blending a little bit better. Maybe you can pick up on it. It may be a little hard to see with the camera. But what this actually does is it starts to move the pigment around more, and it causes us to be able to see that there's a blending method that's going on. And if you're interested in having colored pencil that blends really well, you may want to think about using baby oil. You just need a little bit, you don't need a whole lot. If you do decide to use baby oil to blend your colored pencils, you may find that it doesn't work on certain brands. Again, the brands really matter. What you use, what type of medium that it is, matters. So as we can see here, the baby oil has blended this even more from light to dark. Color pencils are fun. They're easy. They're accessible. You have different ways to use it, but think about your paper and be sure to think about the brand. I have worked with colored pencil probably more often than any with commissions for children's book. This is a McCall. My first book was actually done in colored pencil. I keep wanting to say watercolor. Simon Salamander, a book written by Mary Powell Wagner. This is all colored pencil. This is Owen Al from Owen Al's Wise Words, and then a house commission, believe it or not, from Russell, Kentucky. This, of course, is done in colored pencil. Pencil, graphite, it's so unassuming. What I mean by that is a lot of artists naturally will go towards watercolor, pen and ink, acrylic, or oil. But graphite can be just as stunning and just as amazing. But before we look at the different options for graphite and how graphite works, I want to show you a little bit about why it's important. We'll look at this page here, which is a completed page for Bruce Parsons' Mockingbirds. If you look, there's blue lines underneath the ink. That's the pencil lines. Now I choose to use blue because it's a non-photo blue, which means if I scan this in black and white, all of the blue goes away. It's not seen. Inside of this, there's more going on than just pencil and ink. I've also used whiteout in many areas that I talked about earlier to correct certain mistakes. So what a page looks like in the beginning is something like this. I'll start out with the page. Here's my storyboard. Here's my panels. I draw the panels out first, everything in blue. I know what's going to happen where and what panel. Graphite helps us to do that. Without pencil, you are unable to do a understudy or an underdrawing. You're unable to do your sketches. But using it as a medium by itself to create a drawing can be a little bit intimidating. The first thing we have to understand is that pencils have different values. So the value of the graphite goes from light to dark. Everyone knows what a 4H pencil is, and a lot of people use these 4H pencils for testing and other things. The H in that is a value sensor, so the lighter it is, the value goes up. So 2H, 3H, 4H, 5H, 6H. The darker the value or the hue is, you go back down the scale, which would be down to H, then B, then 1B, 2B, 3B, 4B. Now there's many other classifications for graphite, but that's generally how it works. And just as I've been talking about all day long, you want to go from light to dark. When you're working on a composition or you're working on your final piece, you want to go light to dark. Mixing is very easy with graphite, but you have to take in mind that you're also working with value. So you can see how this goes from light to dark. And the harder I press down, the darker I can make this. this is what you have to use to show light, shadow. This is what you have to use whenever you're working with all of your shading. Build up. Keep your pencil sharp. Blending can also be done with a smudge stick. So here's a smudge stick. You know, a lot of us when we're younger use our fingers, right? We do a shadowing. Don't get your finger all dirty. Just use a smudge stick. This is rolled up newspaper. And what this allows you to do is you go in and you start to move the graphite around on the paper. Start to blend it, smooth it out. If we had a microscope right now, what we'd be able to see is all those little particles of graphite blending out and spreading out. This is a really, really good tool if you want to use this and try to cheat a little bit with your shading. You have to have a good eraser nearby. This is a eraser stick. This helps you to keep your stuff all nice and tidied up. Now, when you're working on your final piece, you may want to use one of the erasers that's a block eraser, such as this one. It's heavier, it's more durable. You can really get in there and you can really, really take away the edges or whatever it is you're wanting to work with. Now there's another way to use graphite. And again, if you have a couple bucks in your pocket, you can go get these graphite Aquarelli pencils. What this allows you to do, same thing as your value with your normal graphite. So you would lay down some graphite in an area you want to shade. You can go light to dark again, just as we did before. But instead of using a smudge stick, if you probably already know by now by the name of the pencils, aqua meaning water, so you can use a water brush. Now, this is an aqua brush, so you can either use a brush or you can use one of these. And what this does is it allows you to go in just as if this was watercolor, and you get to blend this way. Now, some of you may or may not have access to this. If you do, it's fun to use, but notice what's happened here. I used too much of the darker value of the pencil, so the graphite, that dark, took over the entire blending process. Some folks use charcoal, which is a form of graphite really, and they'll do their understudy using that. Mechanical pencils are fine if you want to use a mechanical pencil to do your shading, but you have to have the correct lead. And again, the lead works the same scale as the normal wooden pencils, is that you have to go from light to dark. You go from H to B. So pencils are important. Graphite's great. If you're using it, remember, light to dark, watch your values, be sure to keep your pencil sharp, and always pay close attention to what pencil you're using when you're working on trying to blend it. Believe it or not, I didn't have a lot of examples of graphite to show, but this is a cute bunny from the Pirate Ship Bed Trip by Nancy Quackenbush. So as we've seen today, using different types of techniques and different helpful advice from artists that have already worked with the medium that you selected is wonderful. It pulls in ideas and things that will help you not only to produce the art that you're looking to produce, but also you learn different methods of actually going about showing an idea or a narrative in different visuals, in different ways. Different mediums can also enhance a drawing. You can compare a graphite drawing to a pen and ink drawing. Look at the value and the differences in those shadings or the different hues of color that pops out. And these things are all important. You have to select it. If you have a, let's say for a good example, your narrative is of a mystery. It's something that's let's say just not a darker narrative, but something that's let's say has a hint of the macabre to it. If you do that in bright, beautiful acrylics, that'll be amazing. But it would look so much different than you did it in, let's say, a pen and ink drawing with lots of cross-hatching and shadows and light. Now, that same narrative will look the same and form questions in people's minds looking at it, no matter what the medium is. But looking at a certain narrative in two different ways pulls out different atmospheres and feelings and emotions. Those things are important in art. Art is meant to do that. It's supposed to make you, the viewer, feel a certain way or ask questions. Sometimes artists actually put together different pieces in order to have a statement across. These could be political, these could be non-political. It could just be issues that that personal artist is feeling or thinks is important, wants the world to know about. Whatever it is that you create or produce, these mediums are helpful and here for you to use them in a specific way, take care of the mediums, to produce the art idea that you want to create. So I hope you've enjoyed today's unit. Unit 4 of Section 3 will be focusing on the mediums that we couldn't get to in today's video. So I hope you're having fun with the graphic arts course. I look forward to seeing what everyone creates. Be sure and share those images. There's a forum on the Holler that you could go to. You can actually create a Holler of your own specific for this course. So thanks so much. I'm glad you're participating and hope you're enjoying it. And until next time, I'm Christopher Epling, and keep drawing.